Well, hello out there in the Cotton Belt. Man, we hope that y'all are having a productive early spring here in the Cotton Belt with plenty of sunshine, and I hope those soil temps are warming accordingly. It's been a little bit of a weather whiplash here in Memphis in the Mid-South over the past week. Man, I had my kid outside in her bathing suit playing in the sprinkler with some buddies in the front yard over the weekend. And then Monday, Tuesday, we were back down to freezing temps. I didn't even want to step outside to feed the dog in the early morning. So kind of a crazy little reminder that winter wasn't all the way finished. I guess according to the groundhog, didn't he say as much? But I know that for many folks here in this part of the belt in the Mid-South, they were able to take advantage of that early spring that we had and get some corn planted very early. We had corn planting happening at the end of February. So, here's hoping that little winter relapse we had didn't mess anybody up too badly. I know that that's the risk, but hopefully y'all came out of it okay. Now, many of those who took advantage of that early spring, I mentioned they were doing it at the end of February. That means y'all were absent from the Mid-South Farm and Gin Show, which took place here in downtown Memphis that last weekend in February 27 and 28. And so that's where I've referenced it before on this podcast, but USDA Deputy Secretary Stephen Vaden took the stage, and he gave a really high energy, sort of pointed speech to a room full of farmers on that Friday morning 3 weeks ago. Now, Vaden took aim at a number of what he would call kind of culprits, which are hindering the ag industry. But two specifically that he honed in on, or two issues that he honed in on, were about the fertilizer suppliers and the ag equipment manufacturers. Now, to be honest, he saved his harshest criticism for those equipment manufacturers, it seemed to me, or at least he spent more time talking about equipment manufacturers than anything else. But he delivered this speech, gang, on February 27th. The timing here is interesting. That was a Friday. On March 3rd, which I believe was a Tuesday or Wednesday, let me check my calendar. It was a Tuesday. So basically 2 business days later, news started breaking that the Department of Justice had opened an investigation into the fertilizer market, that they were looking for potential collusion between suppliers to keep fertilizer prices sort of artificially elevated. Now, I want to here, if we can, play a little snippet of Vaden's speech from there at the Gin Show, where he was speaking specifically, albeit sort of briefly, about what he perceives has taken place in the fertilizer market.
Let's talk for a moment about input costs. I have noted that when it comes to the historical practice of what your input costs cost you versus what you get for your commodity, we have seen a very interesting breakage in a pattern that heretofore was in existence for decades. If I showed you a chart of the correlation between your total input costs and what you received for your commodity, going all the way back to the early 1970s, you would see that those two lines are correlated. When your commodity price went up, input costs went up. When your commodity price went down, input costs declined. But starting around 2010 or so, something interesting began to happen. That historical correlation over 4 decades became uncorrelated. Now, input costs are incredibly sticky and show no relationship to what you are receiving for your commodity on the open market. That also happens to correlate with a time in our American economy when so many of the companies that you depend on to sell the used bikes started merging at a very fast pace. So that the brands that you all have depended on for decades may still be there, but they are in fewer and fewer hands. In economic terms, that's called an increase in market concentration. It has been particularly prevalent when it comes to inputs like fertilizer and farm equipment. We now have, with regard to surge fertilizers, two companies in this country that had a combined market share of more than 90%. It's a duopoly.
A duopoly is what he said there at the end with respect to some products. Now, as you can tell, Deputy Secretary Baden's tone was kind of righteous here. It was an interesting energy and vibe here at 8:30 or 9 in the morning, whatever it was, at the Gin Show, which, typically those speeches, they're great. I'm there every year. I record it all every year, but they normally are not that pointed. So it was a neat sort of change from what that room normally is like, because that message, as you all might imagine, was well received in that room full of mostly farmers. Now, he did go on to say that some of the fertilizer manufacturers are, quote, beginning to get the picture, and that they have approached this administration to start having some conversations about how they can be part of the solution to high input costs instead of part of the problem. So he did mention that they may be doing so because there will be, quote, new market entrants in the fertilizer industry soon that give those companies some competition. But yeah, to be sure, Deputy Secretary Vaden did have some sort of redemptive things to say about the fertilizer manufacturers before he was done with that speech. I should also note here that the fertilizer manufacturers who were ultimately named in this DOJ investigation, they have given no public comment on the investigation that was opened to this point. But it's likely that they would defend themselves by pointing to all of the global sort of market disruptions that the fertilizer industry has been impacted by for the past decade, including but not limited to COVID and the fallout from COVID and the multiple geopolitical wars that have hindered supply lines and driven prices upwards based on strained fundamentals. We're going to get into that later, but I just want to be sure, these companies have not been officially sort of defending themselves, but it's likely, they have their side of the story too, and don't take their silence in this moment, which is probably while they're cooperating with the DOJ, to mean that they are somehow, nefarious or guilty here. Allow them their fair response is what I would say. Now, nevertheless, the Department of Justice is moving forward with this investigation. It is in keeping with a memorandum of understanding that the USDA and the DOJ signed in late September of 2025 that was aimed at antitrust in agricultural inputs. Now, the purpose of this was to address competition in the markets for feed, fertilizer, seed, and equipment, according to the DOJ. So, we've done a little bit of digging and interviewing some knowledgeable sources on this topic, we being me and my fellow editors at Meister Media. And I'm going to have a guest on to help me break it all down later in this episode. But first, we're delighted to be able to bring you some knowledge from the good folks at Bayer Crop Science, makers of Delta Pine brand cottonseed. Our custom content editor, Hillary Wynn, recently sat down with our old buddy Jay Mahaffey of Bayer Crop Science, and they discussed some of the agronomic efforts that Jay and Bayer have been undertaking recently. And we're happy to bring you that conversation right now.
Hi, I'm Hillary Wynn, Custom Content Manager at Meister Media Worldwide, publisher of Cotton Grower Magazine. Joining me today to discuss the key 2026 season stressors growers should consider, the Delta Pine traits and varieties that help address them, and how those regionally tailored options fit fields across the Cotton Belt is Jay Mahaffey. He has spent 31 years in the cotton industry working with growers and industry leaders alike. In Jay's current role, he serves in the heart of the Delta as a renowned agronomist and manager of the Bayer Crop Science Learning Center in Scott, Mississippi, where he conducts research studies to bring the cotton industry forward through innovation and hands-on analysis. Jay, welcome to the program.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Jay, as we head into the 2026 season, what stressors and infield issues should growers be keeping top of mind when making seed decisions?
I don't know that the stressors and things that growers need to be concerned about have changed greatly, other than, of course, the focus on productivity and return on investment. When I start thinking about choosing cotton varieties and how to place those, of course, there's a large regional component to that needs to be considered. And by that, I mean somebody in West Texas has a somewhat different set of priorities versus folks in Central or South Texas, the Delta or the Southeast. And I think when you consider all of those things together, it influences decision points that growers need to have emphasis placed on for 2026.
Could you elaborate on what trait platforms and varieties offered by Delta Pine could help mitigate those concerns if they should arise?
Well, those concerns, when I'm talking about that, there's a large portion of Texas, for instance, that's interested in a herbicide only variety, not necessarily the insect control trait. We have some new offerings coming for that. That conversation about variety is very specific to a region, a farmer, his sort of philosophical approach to growing cotton. So when you start to consider that, we made some progress and have some new offerings and products that can help growers depending on their individual system. For 2026, we've introduced one new product, which is actually a herbicide only or an XF only, actually one of the NR products too. But we've also generated some other materials that contain the full spread of insect control traits, Bogard 3 and Thrive On primarily being the two I'm mainly referring to. They're also herbicide tolerant, and they're adapted specifically for places around the U.S. cotton belt, whether those would be in Central or South Texas or into the Mid-South and over into the upper and lower Southeast. We've got a lot of offerings coming that bring a lot of individual tools that some growers value more than others, and that's just the way the markets work.
So, talking about the regionality of these products, how can they best fit growers in their fields across the belt?
I think you have to consider the priorities that growers have in each of their individual systems. I'm very excited about all of the things that Delta Pine is bringing forward. We've got several new 26 varieties that were introduced for the season of 26. They bring things to the market, some of which have existed for a while, like Bogard 3. We're all reasonably comfortable with how that technology performs, what it brings us for lepidoptera and insect control worms. Then you add, in the most recent revelation in the technology development process, is a technology we call Thrive On. That's primarily targeting thrips and lygus bugs in various markets. Those are two very different pests and two very different concerns. The reason all of this is so exciting to me is it brings us another tool for insect management, but it also comes in a new set of genetics, which hopefully is an improvement over the things that we've been marking in the past. It offers a system that gives growers the ability, number one, to choose a cotton variety that's adapted for their region, which needs to be done using the local staff, the local data, experiments on their farm, and the need for the various technologies are contained in the package. And when you think about what all that means is we're starting to fit these products with the latest technology and integrate other things that we refer to as native traits, primarily nematode tolerances, into those packages. And growers need to consider all that carefully and make sure that it fits their system, their need for insect or nematode management, and all of that's part of the process. I would also point out to the audience, we talk about what we need to consider when we choose a cotton variety. Just remember, I'm very excited about new traits, new technologies, and all the things that are beginning to come to the marketplace and be offered. But they're still in a new cotton background. And we're learning as much about that as we can as quickly as possible. But all the things that go into choosing a variety coexist with these new technologies that are coming along. By that, I mean the management style, the PGR applications that are needed, and the potential interactions with technologies like Thrive On and nematode tolerances when they come along, because it's shifting the basic agronomics in the background. And I think it's very important to consider that. And as an example, I would use, say, one of these varieties that contains Thrive On. It's going to come up with a greatly reduced level of thrips damage. It's going to be healthier. It's going to be growing and developing at a rate we've not seen in a lot of cases. Integrate that with something like nematode tolerance. And you also got some other growth capacity there associated with better root system. Well, all of that's in a new variety too. All of that may alter the need for growth control through the system and through the year.
Where can our audience go for more information?
Well, of course, you can contact your local Bayer representative. They have the latest information about the new and exciting products. If you like generally to study agriculture, whether it's corn, cotton, soybeans, I have a website. It's the Scott Learning Center results page is the best way to find it. It's on Bayer.com in one form or another. And of course, we're always willing to answer emails and phone calls here at the Learning Center. And 'cause if we don't know, we'll refer you to the right person.
Jay, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with me today.
Okay, well, a special thanks there to Jay Mahaffey and to our friends at Bayer with their Delta Pine brand cottonseed, of course. Now, I just want to do a little bit of table setting here, gang. Let me tell you, when the news broke of this DOJ investigation into the fertilizer market, I immediately started collaborating with the editors at some of our sister publications here at Meister Media Worldwide, including and especially the editors over at CropLife. Now, CropLife is a Meister Media brand that focuses more heavily on that ag retail space and all of the distributors of the on farm products that you guys will use throughout the season. So, naturally, any story about the fertilizer market is going to fit more squarely into the crop life wheelhouse than it does into my cotton grower wheelhouse. I say all this to say, boy, I leaned heavily on a lot of these editors, my coworkers here at Meister Media, to find me some sources to help me understand. You all in the cotton grower audience are well aware. I'm an old farm boy. I'm an old Ole Miss journalism major. I do not speak legalese, and this DOJ case, especially, is a legal situation. I mean, it is a by definition. You can get into the weeds on some of the legal maneuvering that's happening here. So let me tell you, the crop life editors, they delivered in a big way. They helped me. They have looked into this thing from multiple angles. And so some of the sources that we've spoken to that they introduced me to are lawyers who understand these machinations of the DOJ legal process, but who understandably would rather remain off the record and unnamed. I mean, nobody is wanting to run afoul of the DOJ with an active investigation. And certainly we understand that. But what I've done here is I'm bringing over my friend and fellow editor, Mr. Eric Sfiligoj, to help relay what we've learned about that DOJ case from some of these sources. Now, Eric, welcome to the Cotton Companion.
Thank you, Beck. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. In full disclosure, I have been a guest on Eric's podcast a few times now. So it's about time. It's about time I had you back over here to repay some of the debt you owe.
Reciprocating, I'm all for that.
So, Eric, let's just get right down to it here. I've talked about this investigation a little bit earlier in the podcast. Help me out. Which suppliers specifically have been named in this investigation? And do we kind of have a feel for why those are the brands who were targeted?
Yeah, and actually, yeah, I mean, the companies that the names I've seen, and again, we'll get into some of this more detail here as we move forward through the podcast, but the company names that I've seen put out there are the fertilizer suppliers, the folks that supply the potash, the phosphates, the nitrogen-based fertilizers. That would be Nutrien, CF Industries, Koch Agronomic Services, Mosaic, um, and Yara. Those are really the 5 that I've heard their names thrown about. So, and again, those are all the supplier companies, and that's where this investigation is going to start. So,
Yeah, and we're aware by nature of sort of what the industry, the consolidation that we've seen across the industry. I mean, these are some of the only brands left who are distributors of these products, right? And so naturally, they're going to be the ones named. It's not like these 6 were chosen from a plethora of dozens or something. I
no,
mean, you
and I think the statistic we put a story up recently on our CropLife.com website talking about this whole thing, and one of the persons in the industry we quoted said that about 30 years ago you had 40 companies supplying fertilizer across the globe, and now we're down to about a half dozen. So
yeah, yeah. So that's who we've got. That's who the DOJ has named specifically in this investigation at this point. We did, as I mentioned a moment ago, we talked to some lawyers who understand the process here. Can you sort of summarize what they've told us that the DOJ is doing here on the front end of this investigation? And now that we've established that they've opened it, what are going to be sort of their opening steps as they
Yeah.
get into the process?
Yeah. So basically, I mean, it sounds like the first thing that happens is everything goes through the it's I guess you'd call it, for lack of a better term, a subpoena process where they're actually just, the DOJ is going to try to collect information. So what they do is they put out a request for what they call a CID, which is a civil investigative demand. And like I say, for lack of a better term, that's a subpoena. Well, they'll send that to the execs at the fertilizer companies they're looking into, asking them, I guess, either to submit information or to sit down for an interview to talk and gather information in that type of a setting, like taking a deposition. And from there, then they'll collect all that information, the DOJ will, and they'll put it together in some type of I guess, an analysis or a report that then they will start to dig through to see if they can find if there's for lack of a better term, a there in terms of this accusation, or that there was some type of collusion going on between these companies to keep fertilizer prices uh, extraordinarily high versus what the market would normally have seen. So
Yeah,
yeah,
kind of
so
like the
that would be the
discovery
first.
process.
Yeah, that would be the first part of the process, and then, based on the folks we talked to and what they said, I mean, the discovery phase can last a long time. They pointed out in the past other similar DOJ investigations that, discovery can take a year or more, and that some of these investigations by the DOJ in the past, they've gone on for, 5+ years before there's actually been any definitive conclusion come to, or some type of maybe settlement without ever getting to a you were wrong phase, a fine a stage, if you will. So it's going to be a slow process. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Yeah, yeah, and I wanted to get into the timing and how soon we could expect some resolution. You kind of already getting there. I mean, what I heard these law analysts say um, is that it'll be years. It could easily be years, and it especially gets tricky if you have a change in administration. If the process lasts longer, if there's a presidential election, um, when would that be? Gosh,
28.
28.
Yeah.
And you have a new administration comes in and they have new policy priorities and they don't give a flip about this, it could, it could just die a quiet death 2 years from now and never, never have any resolution. Or, that to be sure, I heard these legal analysts suggesting that this particular investigation, it's not like a it's not like a political football. It's not like looking into collusion among fertilizer uh, companies. It's not like a Republicans versus Democrats uh, culture war thing. So I can't imagine a new administration comes in and goes, "Oh, we're against that whole thing, so we're going to shut it down immediately." I guess is what I'm trying to say. But I'm not Nostradamus. I don't know how that might play out.
Right, and again, I mean, let's be honest. I mean, there are several other, mitigating factors that have gone on these past 5 years that would have caused fertilizer prices under normal circumstances to probably go up. I mean, we had the supply and demand issues back during the COVID years, during 2020, 2021. And then, China decided that they were not going to be exporting any phosphates. They're hanging on to their own supply, which is keeping that particular category higher than normal in terms of, pricing, because there's a little bit of a tight supply in the globe. And, now we have the Iranian conflict, which is messing with the ability to transport fertilizer through the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah,
And, you know,
Ukraine.
yeah,
Ukraine was in there.
yeah. Yeah, so I mean, there are all these other reasons why you could have high fertilizer prices. None of this is happening in a vacuum. So, but and I think you had pointed out that when you were at the gin show that somebody was a speaker there. I think the undersecretary from USDA,
Deputy
and
Secretary, yeah.
yeah, or deputy, okay, and yeah, and he had commented on this circumstance, and I guess in my mind, when you told me that, I thought, well, consider the audience you're talking to. I mean, that may have been a way to kind of get the message out to the choir, if you will.
When we're listing out sort of natural organic reasons that fertilizer prices could be elevated, with all the geopolitical circumstances around the world. Really, what we're talking about is a reason that this case could ultimately come to nothing. I mean, as you put it eloquently earlier, there could be no there after the investigation process. But maybe, maybe there is. We do not know. As I said, we're not here to play Nostradamus. Um, do we think that let's do a little game theory here in a scenario where the DOJ does, this is totally theoretical, they do find a smoking gun and there's an email. Um, you know, again, this is in all likelihood not going to happen, but let's say they find a smoking gun that proves collusion, price collusion. Can growers expect any type of monetary amount awarded to them, or what does a win look like for a cotton producer in that scenario?
Well, in a just to quickly answer that question, I guess it would be a no, based on the legal folks that we talked to the other day and their evaluations. That if the DOJ does find the smoking gun and does find collusion and is able to prove it, it sounds as if there would be some type of monetary fine to the companies, um, that they would pay to the government, it sounded like. But then if for in terms of the growers getting some type of monetary return, it sounds like they would have to file their own civil suits against the companies. Now, obviously, if there was evidence of collusion on the big picture, then the chances of those individual lawsuits succeeding in court is probably going to be higher. But based on what was said, the legal experts kind of indicated that, if a cotton grower wants to get a rebate or a refund from being overcharged, and there was evidence that happened, then they'd have to kind of do it on their own. It doesn't sound like they would be getting the refund from the DOJ settlement if there was such a thing to come down the line. And I know that our friends, our legal friends, did mention that I guess in Illinois, there's already been a case, a civil case filed by a grower against some of the fertilizer companies that was filed on March 7th. So again, we'll follow that separately to see what happens. In this case, it's probably a corn grower, if I had to guess. But nonetheless, if that case moves forward and succeeds, then maybe other growers, cotton, corn, and soybean would also maybe get in line for their turn, perhaps.
I should say we are not advocating for that.
No, we aren't. But that it sounds like if the growers are going to get relief, number one, it'll be years away, and number two, it may be they'd have to do a little bit of their own filings in court to have that to get those refunds. So
Yeah. Last one here, and then I'll get you out the door. And this one, Eric, is a little tricky here. Why is the DOJ undertaking this? Why are they looking into, why have they taken interest in fertilizer prices and sort of ag in general in this moment?
well, and again, I guess this stems from based on what we were told, something back in late September. There was a memorandum of understanding, I believe, that the DOJ kind of put out there where they were talking about paying attention to what was going on in the agricultural marketplace. And based on what we were told about that memorandum of understanding, it pretty much named every category: crop input, equipment, high tech. I mean, it was any type of a service or product that would be bought by the grower community was named as something they were going to start looking at. Now, why are they looking at fertilizer? I'm speculating that because again, we're into the spring season. This is planting season. Everybody's going to be after their seed purchase decisions were made, they're going to decide what fertilizers, what crop nutrients they need in the field to make those seeds as, productive as possible. So that right now is top of mind for the growers. And obviously, if the administration wants to, I guess, grab a headline or kind of show the agri community it's trying to do something to help and address their concerns, um, fertilizer would come to the top of the list, I think. So that I think is why this is happening right now.
Yeah, you have to look at that MOU from September where they say, they said they were gonna be looking at this stuff.
Right. Yeah, and there wasn't any. I mean, based on the way that list read, I mean, I don't I'm hard pressed to think if there was anything missing to there. Maybe forklifts weren't in there, but everything
Right.
else seemed to be in there. So
Yeah, all sort of primary ag input things that our readership are spending dollars on in the season. I want to tread lightly when I say this, Eric, but I think that it could be true that this administration is a little bit wary of how they are perceived on the farm. I think it's feasible that they are a little bit um concerned with how tariffs play in some corners of the ag belt. Now, I should tell you, Eric, you may not be aware, but I've had multiple economists since last fall have said on the topic of tariffs that they are not the reason that cotton prices and specifically cotton prices are struggling. So, let me be clear about that. But that may not be the case across all row crop agriculture, across other crops. And so maybe this administration is a little self-conscious about their level of popularity in the ag belt. And is this topic, input costs, is a winner for them in the farm belt. I mean, there's no two ways about it. I mean, I heard Deputy Secretary Vaden, who you referenced, give this speech. And in fact, Eric, you wouldn't know this, but we will be playing a portion of that speech earlier in this episode. So our listeners will have already heard some of it when they're listening to this interview. Boy, that message that he had for them was well received in that room of farmers. I mean, it's a winning topic politically. And so I think that may have a little bit to do with sort of this DOJ activity now. And that's not to say, and I don't want to cast it as if it's sort of performative. It's highly likely that they could, have some victories and get some of these brands on board with having a little price relief, and that is not performative. Even if the investigation, even that's an avenue that this could work out outside of an investigation into collusion. Um, these guys are better at politics than I am. Let me say that, and they're better at impacting change than I am. But I think that, yeah, the I think that this investigation probably at a minimum has the nice side effect of providing a better look for this administration on the farm than what has been in the news for the first part of their administration. Walking through a minefield trying to say that. I'm trying
right,
to,
but I do agree with you because yeah, I
yeah,
mean, from in the short term, at the gin show and in the general media, this has grabbed headlines. Let's be honest. I
yeah.
mean, everybody's talking about it, everybody's looking at it. So if the goal was to prove that something is being done to address concerns, then that has been met. So
Well, Eric, man, now that I have probably gotten us both in hot water, me more than you, I better go ahead and cut it short because truly, with this story, there is so much that's still sort of uncertain about the case, including especially how the named fertilizer supplier brands would defend themselves. And we have talked about what they would likely point to, so a lot of the geopolitical and sort of market disruptions that are beyond their control. So out of fairness to them, we should note that they appear to be playing ball with the DOJ, according to Deputy Secretary Stephen Vaden, who I've mentioned. He's said explicitly that the fertilizer companies have approached the administration and want to be part of the solution here. And so we should mention that. And we have not heard their official response to this investigation yet. So,
Well, and again, because and part of that is because apparently the CIDs probably haven't been served yet, let's be honest. So, a lot of the companies might default. And again, I've heard this before in other markets across media that, if it's an ongoing investigation, most companies are reluctant to necessarily comment until after the facts are a little better known. So,
yes, good point. Man, I ought to have you around more often to for
you
your
can
for
call me. You can
insight
call
like
me
that.
anytime since we work in the same office, essentially, the with the same parent company. Then yeah, you know where to find me. So
Yeah, yeah. I was gonna say I want to thank you for joining me, but also you still owe me a couple more. So keep that in mind. I'm gonna keep that and keep those favors in my back pocket here. Man, thank you for joining us. Eric Sfiligoj, editor of CropLife. You have been a great guest, and I appreciate you, sir.
thank you, Beck. I appreciate it. Glad to help.
All right. Yeah. So that's going to do it for this episode of the Cotton Companion podcast. Thanks go out especially to Bayer and Delta Pine for their sponsorship. And of course, to my friend and colleague, Eric Sfiligoj, editor of CropLife magazine. As always, I want to thank you, dear listener, for joining us and for your continued support. We hope that you've enjoyed this episode. And if you did like what you've heard, please be sure to spread the word and tell your farming friends and neighbors about the Cotton Companion podcast. Here's where and how they can find us.
You can find the Cotton Companion in 3 easy ways. First, go to cottongrower.com/companion or simply click the podcast tab at the top of the homepage. Second, subscribe to our channel on iTunes or wherever you find your podcasts these days. And 3, sign up for our weekly e-newsletter, the Cotton Grower e-News, that's delivered to your email inbox every Tuesday morning. You can do that by going to cottongrower.com/subscribe. Also, be sure to follow Cotton Grower on social media. We are at Cotton Grower Mag on Twitter. And on Facebook, you'll find us by searching for Cotton Grower Magazine.
The Cotton Companion podcast is produced by Mr. Tyler Hatch and Miss Kim Henderson, our talented colleagues at the world headquarters for Meister Media Worldwide in lovely Cleveland, Ohio. I'm Beck Barnes, and we will be back with you in a couple weeks with the next episode of The Cotton Companion.
'Cause God made me a farmer. Yeah, he works and he works and he works and he works all day. God made a farmer.